Okay, so here we go. Next build. Another kit from a new manufacturer that I've yet to work with. SalvinosJR models, Blue Max Racing, 1968 Pontiac 2+2. I will start this right off by saying I am not a NASCAR person. One race team or another, it's just different strands of spaghetti in the bowl to me. So if you're not familiar with Salvino's, JR Salvino's models, they primarily produce these NASCAR type vehicles. From my understanding, and as you can see from the box, they do everything in the United States, which a big thumbs up to that one. I like that, because this is something quite rare. If you do any kind of looking at where the manufacturing for most kits that you will ever find, they're outside of the US, and I'll leave it at that. You can fill in the blank on that one. So these kits, they come in many different guises. From what I've seen, just from a browsing perspective, they are often very similar, if not identical, in the underpinnings, if not the bodies themselves, depending which race team uses them. And that then is the biggest difference between the kits, is the color scheme and endorsement listings for the different racing teams. Now, again, I don't know Blue Max Racing from any other team, but I saw this one and I thought, the blue looks pretty neat. And certainly I thought, oh, this could provide an interesting color build. So that said, I will put my disclaimer right at the beginning here. I like to take some creative liberty or license with how I do the color scheme and painting scheme on my kits, and the same will hold true here. So I will not be micro-analyzing the Blue Max racing vehicles to make sure I am spot on. That said, it is a fairly simple color scheme, and the Salvino's kits seem to have pretty good detail underneath for engine and interior. So let's start taking a look at what's in the box. So as I like to do when I pull a kit from a company I have not built from before, I always take interest in the instructions, because they do have such a significant impact on your building experience. So let's take a look at this one. So we have another photo of the car, a little blurb of the car's history. We already have a decal guide. That's nice to see. And looks like we have some pretty straightforward illustrations here going through your steps. Engine assembly, front end assembly. Okay, well, this is interesting. We have an assembly step with no illustration. So, all right, hopefully that will become self-evident what's going on there beforehand. This looks just like putting in a shifter, so it's pretty obvious where a shifter goes. We got a paint call out, so all right, that doesn't seem to be a big deal. Hopefully there's not any more like that. We have now the rest of our interior assembly going through. This all looks just fine. So we even have the camera for the in-cabin recording. And now we have, well, this looks good. It looks like we have not just a generic arrow pointing us where our roll cage pieces go, but actual arrow paths to show us how to install it. So that's pretty nice. We have a actual steering shaft linkage. That's good stuff. And putting it together, going through. And onward, doing our final assemblies here. Wheels attachment. They tell you do not glue, so I guess there will be some intention for it to be rolling. We'll see how the wheels go on. You know, I often have said in builds, it's nice if the tires turn, but, you know, I'm not building my cars to, you know, run them around on the carpet, so I don't worry about that so much. What I do concern myself with is to make sure tires, looking at them, you know, head on, that the caster and camber are correct so that they're not drooping or wobbly on the car, because that will really ruin the appearance of the vehicle. And we have a little body assembly. Okay, that's nice. The grills are separate, so they'll be easy to paint and install in the front there. And then the body goes on, and that's it. Okay, so basic instructions. That's pretty good. Now, also of interest for any of these NASCAR builds are the decals, because there's always a lot of decaling to do on these kits. And this I find to be a relief. You will notice all the endorsements. This is one, looks to be at least one big decal. So that makes life easier. But the color register on these looks pretty good. The gold looks nice and gold-ish. So we got two of the white stripes for the side of the car, the lower side of the car, and the front splitter. If you don't want to do the actual painting, we have gauge decals. Gotta like that. So yeah, that looks like a nice decal sheet. So that looks fine. So let's get to the plastic. So we have our body. The molding looks fairly good. Have what looks to be just a little bit of flash, but it looks like a good crisp molding. Plastic feels pretty good. You know, sometimes you get like a kit with cheap plastic. The plastic will feel rubbery, or conversely, you could have a kit where the plastic is very brittle, but this feels pretty good. Oops. All right, and here we have wheels. Wheels look really nice. If you can see the detail in there. Obviously, they will need painting. We have some engine parts. Do have quite a bit of flash here. All right, let's see how the flash bug holds up through the rest of the parts. We have our front, you know, typical NASCARs. You're not going to have headlights on there, but yes, the grill inserts are separate. That's great. So we can do those in black, put them in there. We won't have to worry about masking off. So that looks good. All right, we have our chest. Oh, this is really nice detail, molding detail on this. That's great. They even went and did it through the back, even though your kit will build with a closed trunk. That's still there. So I guess if you want to have a display chassis, you could build it without the body. We have good underbody detail as well. And to even mold in the steering linkage. I mean, the steering bots. That's nice. All right, but we do have, again, we got quite a bit of flash along these parts. So all this will need to be cleaned up. Okay, so it seems the flash bug has come to town. I got over my COVID bug, and now I have contracted a flash bug. Okay, I did have one loose piece. Now everything came in bags. This fell out of one of my bags, one of these shock pairs, but that's okay. Yes, yeah, so we have some flash. There is no denying that. However, looking at the parts themselves, they are nicely detailed. We have one-piece headers here. That should make life a whole lot easier. I like that. So, nicely detailed engine. Yeah, this is looking good. I like it. All right, we even have under detail on the hood. As I start with the back of the sprue. Nice big slab hood. Oh yeah, look at that. We do have rear deck detail for the fuel tank, or fuel cell in racing speak. You know, the big thing of flash here. This is why I don't worry about the stuff on this bruise. It's getting it off the parts. That's the important part. We even have some hoses here, pedals. Okay. We have a different front end here. We have our seat, a front and a back, so it won't be hollow. Yeah, I'm starting to think that, you know, you could probably build this and have a really nice model to display without the body. So if you're a real NASCAR person, I'm suspecting that you could probably build this kit. If you want to do a display, you could have the whole chassis, everything on one side, have the body on the other, sort of, you know, like a tank with a cut through almost, but not a cut through, just having the body over. Or if you want to get creative, you could, well, you know, technically you could just cut this right down the middle and have a car where you have the exterior on one side and then the cutaway, seeing how all of the inside detail sits in there. And if you did something like that, then you would have the vision of all the trunk detail without having to cut the trunk open. And I think I'm possibly getting ideas. Maybe not for this one. This one I'm not going to do anything crazy. I just want to build it and see how well it goes together. Yeah, see, this is, there's going to be some cleaning up to do here. You know, it's finely detailed, but there's also quite a bit of flash crusting on it. So, you know, if I had to make a choice between poorly detailed parts with no flash or well-detailed parts that need some cleanup, I'll take the well-detailed parts every day of the week. Because cleanup, okay, it may be a little tedious at times, but, you know, you do it and it's done. The detail is still there. Parts that are poorly detailed or lack detail, you know, it's a whole different story to try to add detail. Oh yeah, look, the side bulkheads. This is all really nicely molded, except for these giant, horrendous injector pin marks. Holy cow, look at these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You know, if you're going to display it without the body or looking in, you would have to really look into getting rid of those. You know, with... Where's my scraper? You'd have to get dental on this, you know. Get your scraper, work that off, sand it down. Again, not a particularly difficult task to do, but that would be another step. Curiously enough, there are no, the sink marks are only on the outside of the part. Although they did put detail on the outside of the part. You know, you could look at it and say, well, they put the injector pin marks on the outside of the part because that would be nestled in the body, so you're not going to see it. So if that's the case, then why bother putting the detail on it, the piece? But oh well. Nevertheless, there is a lot of neat stuff, a lot of neat detail on these parts. So there is a lot of potential here. Now the clear parts, check this out. Those are nice clear parts. Crystal clear, no distortion. They do have the depth of the, I guess, safety bars, whatever they're called. Don't hate me because I don't know all the NASCAR terms for these things. So they should be easy to color in. You know, black marker, 1, 2, 3, that's done. We even get the little quarter windows for the rear. All right, but that's nice clear. Now let's look at the tires. So I did open the bag of tires and just popped one out to have a look at it. And well, yes, there will be work here. We have this flange from the molding of the tire that will have to come off. We have nubs where the tire was attached to its tire sprue, which are not a big deal because, oh, that one's gone. And look at that, that one's gone too. But you still have a big molding seam here. So, you know, if you want any kind of realism to your kit, this would need to be sanded anyway, so that would take off that center seam line. I can't see any type of approach to the build where you would not scuff up that tire a little bit. The little bit I do know about, you know, these cars is usually when they get a fresh set of rubber on there, they immediately smoke them up a little bit to get them warm, because the tire bites better when it's warm. Either that, or I've just been watching really bad drivers on YouTube. But the tires are solid. They are no names. Let's go back to that decal sheet and see. But yes, they are no name tires, but we do get tires, decals for the tires. So that will be something new for me to do. I've never done tire decaling. The only thing I would say about that right off the bat is, you know, tires always, decals always have a bit of gloss to them. Tires obviously are flat, so if you just put the decal on the tire, you're going to have a glossy lettering on the flat tire, which is obviously going to look like it's a decal. So probably just going to have to go in with a dull coat and dull coat the surface of the tire. That will blend in the decal to the tire, and that'll be that. Okay, so that is the Blue Max racing car from SalvinosJR Models, or JR Salvinos Models. I'm not quite sure which way you pronounce it. Oh, there we go, SalvinosJR Models. And there's their website, so you can see all the other iterations of this kit. And I know they do older cars, newer cars, but primarily, you know, NASCAR cars. So I will start with this. I will definitely have a snow report on the cleanup to see just how much cleanup work there was to do, since it seems like that will be a significant part of this build. And then I'll be back with that. All right, so off we go. Okay, so I've been doing my parts cleanup, and even though when I first looked at the kit, I could tell there was some flash and parts cleanup to do. Oh my God, it's every piece, every sprue, a lot of work. You know, I really try to refrain from saying a lot of negative things in these reviews, because, you know, this is supposed to be fun and enjoyment. And yes, absolutely, parts cleanup is part of every build. However, I started the cleanup on this kit, and I was only a small way into it when I stopped and looked at the rest of the pieces and thought, wow, this is a mess. So, you know, no offense to JR Salvinos. I don't want to speak for the rest of the kits in their catalog, or certainly even other kits in similar to this, because maybe I got one that was, you know, not exactly the best of the quality prints of the kit. But wow, you know, who's ever watching the mold quality, well, I shouldn't say the mold quality, but the mold cleanliness, should maybe take another look at what's going on the factory floor, because the shame of it is that the pieces, if I can bring this in here, the pieces, as I said in the intro, you know, there's a lot of really nice detail. The parts are really well done, but they are mired in just endless flash and mold misalignments and mold steps and injector pins galore. A little disappointed with that. Again, if it was just a poorly made kit, you know, that would be one thing. But it's a really nicely made kit in terms of the detail invested in the parts. But then there's all of this. Okay, and here we go. color. All right. So obviously been doing the painting. As always, and this is why I always say I like to do a lot of brush painting on the sprues. You know, I had said that the parts were nicely detailed despite the flash issue. And, you know, they really are. It is a nicely molded kit in terms of its detail. Yes, the flash, I've talked about it enough. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. But once you're done with that, you have something really nice to work with. So let's talk about the color scheme. So I kept with the blue and the white, and you can see here that is done, and just a simple masking scheme with a, whoops, obviously the hood is not glued on, with just a simple stripe of white across the bottom. You know, it's just a matter of running a piece of masking tape across there, gray prime inside, blue on the outside. All the other color detail with this particular car will be coming from this really nice set of decals, so that keeps the painting easier. Now, the kit, somewhat curiously, does not come with any chromed parts, which no big deal, that's fine. I can paint. However, in the instructions, they do have callouts for pieces that are in chrome. So I don't know if in my kit the parts just didn't get their chrome dip, or if that's an idiosyncrasy or oversight in the instructions in this particular series of the kit. Whatever. I went ahead and did some painting of my own. So here are our wheels. That is just a simple brushed nickel spray. That's the name of the color. And I blacked out the slots in the wheels. Now, talking about detail you discover. Now, here are the wheel backs. And these are actually, it's probably going to be very hard to see on camera, but these are ribbed. And at first I thought it was just a plain wheel back. But then I realized, they actually put a graving detail, a molding detail for a disc brake, which also explained why on the front and rear axle they had these ears on the axle and on the front knuckles, and I realized those are supposed to be the calipers. So it's an interesting way to represent some detail in the molding. So I went ahead and painted the calipers red and tried to pick up that detail. Now, the paint instructions for the kit specify a lot of stuff going into flat black. As I've said before in other build videos, when I figure out my paint scheme for a kit, the colors I choose are colors that I'm trying to blend together for a decent complementary look in terms of a palette, but also to use some contrasting color to bring out some of the detail in the parts. As realistic as it may be to do a lot of this in flat black, then all the nice detail I would have discovered in working with the parts would then have been lost, because it would have been a lot of the same color. You know, I've said before, flat black is the black hole of lack of detail. It's also the black hole of detail. So when you have a lot of flat black things next to each other, it becomes very difficult to, discern any detail in the parts later on when the construction is complete. So I went instead and did something a little bit different. Now, you can see here, these will be the sides of the chassis with the roll bar. This will be the driver's side with the netting. So again, this is all supposed to be flat black. I decided to go with a blue. It is not the metallic blue of the body, so there will be some contrast there. And in the meantime, I went with the tan netting to give that a little bit of a highlight. The blue I kept throughout for all the roll bar pieces, roll cage pieces, going all the way into the fuel cell detail at the back of the car. And speaking of nicely detailed pieces, you know, once you paint things up, you really get to see. And they have this fuel cell, and that's all looking pretty neat under there. I did go a little extra with some of the suspension detail. I picked out the colors of the springs. That is a raised mold detail, so that was a simple, you know, dry brush type thing, coming in with the brush almost 90 degrees off center and just rubbing it along those raised spring lines to get that. So we have some engine parts, transmission, front suspension detail. Our shock absorbers, they do actually call them out to be in yellow, but you know, I like to do mine in yellow, so yellow they are. Now, one thing I wanted to note out, I already, as you can see, glued the engine halves together. The exhaust headers do come off the engine. This is two pieces, and they join in the middle underneath for the crossover. Now, when I glued them together, I had a feeling that this was going to be a really horrible joint, and it was. So I glued it without gluing it to the engine so I could sight it, and then I went and did some Tamiya putty, sanded it a little bit. I didn't go crazy to make it perfect. It's good enough, but at least because there were gaps and it was looking ugly, so I cleaned it up. We have some of our engine parts. This was just a simple spray. Now for the metallic parts that you see, I did everything with a black primer and then the metallic color over it. Metallics always look really good on top of the black primer. Rather than a white or a gray, makes the metallic color a lot richer. This is a just metallic silver spray from Rustoleum that I used here for this coloring, and looks pretty good. But pieces are ready to go. The mystery step in the instructions that had the missing drawing, you know, by following the part numbers, it was simple enough to figure out what those pieces were, and you know, figuring out a good paint color for them. So yes, the diagram should be there, but in terms of the assembly and getting the kit painted up, no, not a problem at all. Just to show you the chassis pan, I already mounted the fire extinguisher and the shifter, just so I could paint those up without having a big gap or nub mark when I put them in. So they are in there. Again, the bottom of the fuel cell, this will be part of the steering box, so that went into semi-gloss black. There will be, once it's together, some black contrast against each other, and that can be seen here. Semi-gloss for some of the suspension elements and flat black for others. So it will provide some contrast for detail without making it, you know, look silly, hopefully. Now, there are some nice decals, fire extinguisher, the dashboard, of course, being that it is a racing machine, very simple, but we do get those dial faces. So it should be going together pretty well once I start the assembly, which will be the next step. I do plan on wiring the engine, so got myself some nice yellow pre-wired distributor. The distributor does sit on the manifold head. I am going to drill that out with my hand drill, drop that distributor cap right in there, so that it will be hidden inside the mold detail, and take it from there. So that's where it's at. Gonna move forward now and get to assembly. Yay! Okay. Okay, so here we go. And as you can see, assembly is pretty much done at this point. So let's talk about what the build experience was like for the kit. Now, as I said before, the flash thing, talked about it, done talking about it. The actual fit of the kit, I have to say, is quite good. There are accurate locations for locator pins, locator marks. So there really was no issue with the kit assembly, which was nice after the initial concerns about getting the parts cleaned up and getting them together. So things went together smoothly. That's not to say that the assembly is somewhat tricky at points, specifically working with this roll cage. And get my pointer here. Now, as I had pointed out in the build montage, you know, it is a little bit of, requires a little bit of finesse to get all of these pieces in here. If you do not have tweezers, I really suggest you get a pair of tweezers if you want to do this kit, or I suspect ones similar to it, because to work with your fingers inside this space, positioning these various roll cage elements will probably be pretty frustrating and much more difficult than they need to be. So, but the overall theme, I would say, as a build note with this is you've got to test fit your parts. Always important. With this, I found it to be so very important because even though, and I have to say this, the instructions were pretty good about giving you a tip of how to snake some of these pieces in here, which I showed in the initial look at the kit. However, they're not so clear on where your actual attachment points are. And the only way you're going to figure that out is by putting the piece in there, pieces in there, and moving them around to see where they really should fit and how they should attach. So takes a little finesse, takes a little effort, but once it's together, boy, you know, it builds up nice. It is a nice looking kit, and this undercarriage here really is, it's a beauty, I have to say, for the effort to get here, or maybe partly because of the effort to get here. The more I look at it, the more I appreciate how nice the kit looks. You know, obviously how you do the paint, you know, brings out all that detail. I really like the way this color scheme came out, but you know, that's just one particular scheme. Yet there really is a lot going on in there, and as I had suspected in the beginning, you know, you could build this just out as it is and display it with the body next to it if you want to see the whole inside structure of the car, because yeah, it's all there and it's really nice. Underbody as well, even though it's obviously a little more simple than topside, it does fit together. And speaking of accuracy of in locator pins, the two pieces for the headers, you know, you had to join that together. I showed how I did that, you know, as a dry fit, gluing that seam. But with the engine located in, the pipes on, there's a small locator pin here on the side of the chassis for a pin, a locator mount on the side of the chassis for a pin on this final exhaust piece, which runs from here down. So just to see, I laid the pin in there and boom, it was right on the two knobs for the headers. So you can't ask better than that. So good job, Salvinos, on that. You know, again, here on the undercarriage, painting brings out some of the detail to try to appreciate the springs and the shocks and the calipers and whatnot. So that is extra work, you know, obviously on my own, but that is an option, of course, to bring those things out. Now, the body itself, I didn't really show any building for this, just a teeny bit, because there's not a whole lot to do. Air dam, the grills, the rear bumper, this spoiler, it all goes together no problem. The hood does come with small hinge pins that get trapped under there. I cut those off because I just assumed be able to pop the whole hood loose, as I did, to show off all that wonderful underhood detail. Now, as I was building, I showed how I took out this plate it's actually part of the body. It's not a separate piece, but molded in was this, what would be the remainder of the trunk if this was the window as on the actual car, which just came down at the angle and not like the fastback type window. So with this in place as it was, when I lined it up against the chassis just by laying the fender wells over the tires, I could see this wonderful detail back here would have been lost. So what I did, I just used my scribing tool. Boom, I took it out. I just smoothed out the edge with my X-Acto knife, painted it flat black. It's going to look like it was meant that way, but now you'll be able to look in and see that, because I did consider a little bit actually cutting the body to have a cutaway view into the car, but with all those wonderful decals that come up, I was very hesitant to do that. So I decided this was a compromise solution instead, and that should work out just fine. Here you see the rear window that is going to sit on there like so. I did slip with my scribing tool, so you'll see 2 marks here. Don't use a scribing tool when you are sneezing, because that's what's going to happen. And it seems to be a lesson I just don't learn because I've done this before. So, but that's no big deal, because most of my oops is on the actual ledge that the window's going to sit on. So that will cover that up. Anything else that isn't, a little touch of paint, and that'll be gone. So that is the story with the body. Now, an interesting thing with the chassis, when I was assembling my chassis, when I first started putting the pieces for the front suspension together, which is where you start with it, looking at it, I realized if this was along the length, it had a warp, a twist towards the front, so that looking at it head on, this corner, the passenger side, was up a good, 3/8 of an inch out of alignment. So since I'd already started mounting some pieces, I thought, let me roll the dice on this and see if during assembly it self-corrects. And the good news is it did. So now sitting here, there is just a little bit that's maybe 1.5 millimeters from 3/8 of an inch, which is probably about 7 or 8 millimeters. So there is that little wiggle that remains, but with no intervention in terms of trying to straighten the body, just in assembling the kit, it basically is down from that big wobble, or what would have been a big wobble, to just this teeny wobble. Now, when the chassis actually goes into the body, it will be held by, because I test fitted it, there are 2 insertion tabs here, which go right into here. And there is a ledge in the back that the rear of the chassis pushes into. Now, it is a tight, secure fit without any glue. So I'll see when I put it in there, when I'm finally, doing the final assembly on it, see if it actually does straighten itself out that last teeny bit. But even if it doesn't, like I said, that's next to nothing. The build is a bit delicate because you do have a lot of relatively small pieces. When I was mounting the rear tires and wheels, I did knock my rear suspension here loose and had to remount that. No big tragedy. The tires, I had mentioned before, I wasn't sure if I would have to glue them. I did in fact glue them. The mounting for those wheels is like a little cone with a flare. The wheel is supposed to snap down on that so that it can roll. Yes, it does roll, but the wheels were flopping all over the place, and it just looked terrible. So I went ahead, put the 4 wheels on with some glue, set the car down, trued them all up so that they were straight. The caster and camber was all in alignment, and then just let it sit overnight. And no, it does not roll, but yes, the wheels are not going, clown car style. The tires took a lot of work to get them into good shape. Again, not to harp on the flash thing, but I have never had to put so much work into a set of tires to make them look decent between sanding and everything else. Now, I showed a technique for putting a tire on a socket and then using that to hold the tire as you sand it. This is a pretty well documented technique on a lot of build channels. What a lot of people do is they'll put a socket connector in here, put an electric drill, and hold the sandpaper and let the drill grind down the tire. I did not venture into that because I didn't want to chew up my tire too much, and I tend to go a little overboard with my tools, when it comes to running things down. So I'm a madman with a belt sander, so I didn't want to take the tires out of round by over sanding one part of them. So there is a very faint, I hope that is coming out on the video, there is a very faint center line there, which still is on the tire, but I'm not going to worry about that, because when the body is on, most of that tire will be sitting in the wheel well. In fact, it'll be flush in the wheel well. So the only part you'll be able to really look at that center seam is the little gap between the front air dam and the ground, between the rear bumper and the ground, or if you actually turn the kit over. So like everything else that I talk about with doing detail and finish work, there is a compromise point. That was my compromise point, so that was it. So I stopped there. The weather strippings, safety bars on the windows and the side windows, I just did that with a Sharpie. I did not put the front and rear window in because the body does take a little flexing to get it on there, and I didn't want to put the glass on just to have it pop back off. So the only thing left to do, body on, windows in, decals, and that's going to be it. So next stop, final build reveal. Alrighty, so here we go. Okay, couldn't resist to pop back in. So as you can tell, I just popped the chassis into the body. I put the hood on, and lo and behold, there's only about 0.5 millimeter of wiggle. So it almost self-corrects. So I just thought I'd point that out. Pretty cool. Okay, on to decals. Okay, and here we go. It is final build reveal time for the Blue Max Racing 1986 Pontiac 2+2 driven by Rusty Wallace by SalvinosJR Models. All right, and there we go. We got ourselves a car. So, I will make my usual statement. Pretty happy with the way it came out. But with the case of this car, a little bit more so. If you're just tuning in, if you had fast forwarded some of the earlier stuff, there was a significant issue with this kit on the cleanliness of the molds, all the flash issues I talked about in length at the beginning, so I'm not going to go over all of that again. But I looked at this kit as I was going through it. It's almost like a diamond in the rough, so to speak. So the kit builds up beautifully. Not that I am the definitive build here, but with the level of effort I put into it, I'm really happy with the way it came out. Certainly from, and this being the point, from what I saw to begin with all the flash and all the cleanup on the parts, I was a little concerned where this was going to go. But with that, or perhaps because of that extra effort, I do appreciate the final product here all the more. So obvious thing right off the bat, and I had some J-type pegs prior to this showing, sequentially the decal buildup. Decals are beautiful. They look great on the car. What originally drew me to this, as I said in the beginning, was the color scheme with the blue and the gold numbers and everything and the white. I think that's a real sharp combination, and its final assembly and presentation, here we go. So it worked out well. The decals went on beautifully. These are Pro Slide decals, which are supposed to be better decals from what I see elsewhere, but whatever the case, they went on. I didn't have any issues with the decals. The only spot where they gave me trouble was on the dashboard. They do give you dial face decals for the dash. However, they were not the right size, I found, for the gauge cluster. So they did not fit. They wouldn't sit down. And when I tried adjusting them, because they're tiny and very fragile, they started to break apart. So certainly part of that is on me, but just letting you know. So something to keep in mind if you're going to build the kit and you're going to use those decals, before you put them in the water and try to fit them, make sure that they are going to sit correctly on those dial faces. So, but other than that, on they went. The only challenge I had on the body as the car comes around is the AluGuard decals that sit over the rear wheel well. Now, this cutout in the decal is not on the decal. The decal is the full width, and then when you put it on, the full length, and then when you put it on, you have to cut it to the wheel well. It's not a big deal. It's certainly something I would have preferred to do before putting the body on the chassis. Yes, it's not a big deal to pop the chassis out of the body and do it, but I had already put in my clear parts. I didn't want to break them loose, blah, 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 blah. So compromise. I put them on with the Mark Fit, I'm sorry. The decal was on there nice and tight, so I could just go in there with a real sharp blade and zip, and that was it. It was done. So, sometimes for all the planning that you try to do, something still surprises you, and certainly I dropped the ball on that one. For the tires, now these were not pad printed tires, and I showed about all the cleanup with the tires. They do give you the decals for the Goodyear Eagle. I can't remember if I'd ever done tire decals before. I don't think I did, even before the channel here. But I have to say, they went on no problem. They look really good. The only catch when you do decals on tires, and I may have mentioned this earlier, you have to remember the face of the decal will always have a little bit of a glossy sheen to it. So when you put the decal on a tire, you just have to go back with a dull coat. And I used some Model Master flat clear and just brushed it over the decals. This sets them, seals them in, and it also takes that shine off. So it really does look like a printed tire. Certainly pad printed tires would have been easier because the letters are on there and that's that. But, this is a perfectly workable alternative to that. And in the final product, they do look really nice on there. As we come around. So the interior, of course, is a little difficult to see right now. I did make some color choices on there that were contrary to what the color indications in the instructions were, but that's the way I chose to do my kit, and that's the end of that. Of course, I did take out that rear panel there so you can see more of that fuel cell detail in there, and I'm going to pick it up in a moment and we'll have a look at that. But I just wanted to finish what I was saying about my overall impressions of the build experience. So just to run through it point by point, parts cleanup, a lot of work for that. Certainly a little bit daunting at times, spending all the time whittling and scraping and sanding and everything else. However, when it came time to assembly, the fit of the kit was great. All the pins, locator marks, everything spot on. Everything went together smoothly. So very good grades on that. Instructions, okay, they got the job done. Test fitting is crucial to the build, especially when working with that roll cage. So do keep that in mind. And then final with the decals. Decals are fantastic. So only good things to say about that. So in summary, with my impression of the kit, you know, if it's a first time kit, you might go a little nuts with the parts cleanup. But it will certainly give you a lesson in doing your parts cleanup. You know, the kit will, I would say, most likely go together well if you don't do a thorough parts cleanup. There are some parts where certainly the cleanup is going to make a difference between parts joining together correctly. But again, that's what test fitting is for. And if you'd see your first crack at something like this, it would be a good learning experience for you. If you had a few kits under your belt, you know, the nice thing with flash and parts cleanup is it's pretty obvious. So after having done a few kits, you'll see that, you'll recognize it right away. It may not be the most fun thing to do, but you see it, you clean it up, it's addressed, and that's the end of it. So there you go. All right, now let's get handy here. So I'm going to bring this in, and now with that rear deck removed, you can see the fuel cell detail in there. Of course, it is a little tough to get light in there on camera to see that interior, but it does build up very nicely in there. Underbody in its final form, you know, it is pretty straightforward because it is a pretty straightforward machine. I talked about the little bit of juggling to get this rear end together, but patience, tweezers. Tweezers are an absolute must with this kit. It goes together okay. And of course, let's look under that hood. Engine bay, really nice on this kit. You know, there's a lot of detail in there. And because it is a NASCAR type vehicle, you know, it's all open, so you can see right through past it. But I like that. I like that bare bones, you know, mechanical look. That's really neat. And with the wiring I added in there for the ignition, just dresses it up a little bit. So there we go. A nice looking machine. So that's it for the build. Oh, one thing I almost forgot to mention. As a final build note, the clear parts, they are super clear, which is really nice. They have very little distortion, also very nice. However, they are, I remember when I was just a young lad building models, clear parts could be brittle. And these parts had some of that brittle nature to them. In fact, you can see right here just a little crack, which I put on there by my own handiwork while removing it from the clear part sprue, because they did have very large attachment areas. And as careful as I was, I did manage to put a crack in it. So yes, that's on me, but you know, builder beware. Those parts are somewhat brittle, and if you do twist them a little bit while you're removing them from the sprue, you are going to get a crack. You know, I remember in the old days, sometimes you go to remove clear parts and pang, you get a crack through the whole thing, and not a happy day, but not the case here. So that is that. I'll drop the hood back on. The hood is a bit of a tight fit. As you can see, those corners sit up, but you just give it a little press and they drop right down. And you can see that on the driver's side as well. So that is good. Bingo. So it's a good build, except for that parts cleanup. Really enjoyed it. Very happy with the way it came out. And it certainly makes a nice piece to go on the shelf. You know, and like I said, if you really, you know, into your NASCAR stuff, you know, you could get one of these kits. You could do a cutaway on the body to get the full inside view, and you could even light the thing up inside, or build a chassis to one side, body to the other. There's quite a few different things you could do with this if you really wanted to make like a showpiece, you know, in a display case. So, and that's where all this extra interior detail that they put in there, you know, really has a value to it. It looks good built in when you look in the car, but you also have that option as to do something else with it. So good job including that, Salvinos. So that's it. I'm going to wrap it up. As usual, thank you for watching, and please do, if you've enjoyed the video, subscribe, you know, hit the alert button. I always forget to say that, but you know, do hit the alert button so you know when I post something new. I'm not the fastest builder. This one took a little bit longer because I had crushed this finger in a tent frame while doing a book show with my authors group. So this was out of commission for a little while and had to wait for that to heal up so that I could do the fine work. But here it is. Yeah, so like I said, thank you for watching. Please do hit the alert, you know, subscribe, share it. You know the deal. So as always, thank you for watching, and until the next build, enjoy your hobby. Alrighty.